Hi Year 11, welcome to this lecture on Death of a Naturalist by Miss Gordon. So if you have your poetry anthologies with you, please, I would like you to take them out, open it up to Death of a Naturalist, because before we do any sort of analysis or talking through the poem, we're going to take a moment and we are just simply going to read it first. Okay. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. Green and heavy-headed, flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Bubbles gargled delicately. Blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. Here every spring I would fill jam potfuls of the jellied specks to range on windowsills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. Then, one day, when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax dam. I ducked through hedges to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down the dam, gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped, the slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. So that is our reading of Death of a Naturalist, and as you can remember now, that it's actually a poem. It's about told from a child's perspective, and it's a child's remembering of how they used to love to go out to the dam and the townland and gather up frog spawn as a child. Right, let's have a look at how the question could actually look in the exam now. As you can see here, this is an example of how it could be phrased. Read the poem below, Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney. Death of a Naturalist is a poem about, and you would get a choice of theme here, Year 11. So it wouldn't have all of these here, it would have one of them. So it could be Death of a Naturalist is a poem about nature. How does Seamus Heaney present nature in the poem? Remember to refer to the context of the poem in your answer, 15 marks. Or it could say, Death of a Naturalist is a poem about change. How does Seamus Heaney present change in the poem? Remember to refer to the context of the poem in your answer. Or Death of a Naturalist is about childhood, etc., etc. So you would then need to go back, look at the poem and focus on the question. So let's focus on nature for now, because I feel like at the heart of it, it is a nature poem. So even if you got the question childhood or change, you cannot avoid talking about nature. Okay, if our question is nature, I want to look at the poem and think, right, how am I going to answer this? Well, how does Seamus Heaney use nature? My interpretation of this is that he's using nature to explore the relationship between humans and nature. But he uses this in two different ways. So he's looking at this change, of course, because you can't talk about Death of a Naturalist without looking at the change of the poem, how a person's perspective on nature and life changes as they get older. So they change who they are and they change age. But we can also look at this as a poem about exploring that transition from childhood into adolescence. And I'll explore that and explain that more in a moment when it comes to picking the quotations I would use for an analysis. So year 11, some top tips for tackling this exam question. You should track through the poem chronologically. So that means you start from the beginning, you track towards the middle, and then you go to the end. Because if you can do that in a logical order, in a sequence, then it makes your analysis much clearer, and it shows that you are tracking through the poem yourself for change. Use a wide range of evidence from the poem, as I said, beginning, middle, and end. Get in those one-word quotations. Use clear topic sentences or points that link back to the question asked. So important to have a clear focus on the question. A good analysis or essay is one that reads clearly without having to look at the poems. Because it means that they are really clear. I keep using the same word in here, year 11, but it's because they're really clear. It's really easy to see that they focus on the question and they know what they're talking about. You interweave your structure or your form analysis with language. And I'm actually going to show you how to do that as well, because the best analyses, they don't just put them in separate paragraphs. They have it interweaved all together as they're tracking through the poem chronologically. They always come back to the focus of the question. So if your question is about nature, you keep coming back to this idea of how Heaney presents nature or childhood or change. Link relevant context in. Do not tell me what year Heaney was born in, because it does not make a difference to the quality of your analysis. So if you're going to put context in, it has to be relevant context. And consider the poet's intentions by exploring the themes of the poem. Always think why. Really, really important, year 11, to always think why. Why is the poet doing this? What lesson does he want me to learn? First thing I do, if I were you, as in the exam, I would highlight the quotations I plan on using for my question. So if my question is, how does the poet use nature in the poem? Okay, I'm thinking, right, he uses nature in the poem because he's exploring the relationship between humans and nature, between the speaker and nature. But also, is there another reason? Yes, he's looking at the change and how someone's perspective of nature can be reflected in how they see nature. I mean, the poem is called Death of a Naturalist, someone who loves nature. But also he's looking at the transition from childhood to adolescence within the language he's using, which is very sophisticated. I'm going to show you now how I put that together into a single poem analysis. So I'm going to read through and talk through any bits that I think may need further explaining. In Death of a Naturalist, Seamus Heaney meditates on the relationship between human beings and nature and uses that relationship to explore the transition. Transition means that change. Again, you need to ensure you have a broad vocabulary here around questions, year 11. The transition from childhood to adolescence. As the speaker grows up, his relationship to nature changes. Instead of enjoying the natural world with innocent curiosity, he finds it threatening and disgusting. And because I go back here and look at the quotations I've highlighted, I'm going to explain how they go from innocent to threatening and disgusting. So I'm going to start from the beginning of the poem. Heaney conjures a richly evocative image of the countryside, telling this poem through the eyes of a child. Very important common noun form there. It's not Heaney talking from his own perspective now. He's telling this poem through the eyes of a child who seems to gleefully explore the flax dam, which festered in the heart of the townland. So I'm fluently embedding my evidence there. The verbs festered and rotted create an ominous tone and would seem to suggest that it's potentially a disgusting place, but the speaker does not seem to notice, and instead goes on a sensory journey to explore all the different insects and reptiles that make it their home. Dragonflies, spotted butterflies, and the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn. You can imagine a child, a young boy, so excited to explore all the insects and bugs. The speaker takes real pleasure in discovering nature and is fascinated with life itself, as conveyed through the superlative, but best of all. That word best is the superlative there. This is continued toward the end of the first stanza when the speaker progresses to inform us of lessons which he learned in school. So we have that childish storytelling aspect that Heaney so wonderfully incorporated in his poem. You know, it's like, imagine that child going home from school, talking to the parents about what the teacher told them, and so excited and learned this today. My teacher told me this and told me that and told me this. So that Heaney has conveyed through the language in his poem when he says, this continued toward the end of the first stanza when when the speaker progresses to inform us of lessons which he learned in school and uses the childish vernacular. So here I'm really paying attention to these key words throughout the poem. Daddy and mammy. Vernacular means like the words they use. So you can just say childish language. This is just me showing off here. Daddy and mammy to echo what the teacher had told him in school. Now, daddy and mammy are colloquialisms used in Ireland. Now, younger children will use them to refer to their mother and father. They're like pet names, really. So these colloquialisms firmly place this poem in an Irish context. Now I'm exploring an alternative interpretation here. Alternatively, this could be interpreted to represent the child learning about reproduction and sex and how they are unable to grasp its full meaning, which is explained through the use of simplistic language. So a teacher in school, when they're trying to show and explain to students, young children, about how the tadpoles are created with the mammy and daddy. So it is quite a simplistic metaphor for the reproductive system and learning about sex. I'm looking now at the change. This second stanza, there is a clear change in tone here. The second stanza abruptly begins with the adverb then to signify that time has passed in the speaker's childhood and also to indicate a change in tone for the poem. That's my topic sentence, right? I'm summarising what I'm going to analyse here. What began as more light-hearted has now changed to aggressive, as indicated by the harsh monosyllabic lines. Monosyllabic means every word is one syllable. Then one hot day when fields were rank. So that first line, each word is one syllable with cow dung. Cow dung, again, another Irish colloquialism. So this is my context here. I'm not shoehorning it in, but it is really relevant for understanding this poem. And that's exactly what the exam board want to see. Cow dung is an Irish colloquialism for manure produced by cows, so that's cow poo, to really break it down. And it's used to fertilise the fields and encourage growth. And again, we have this idea of change, of growth, of transformation. It's been used here to indicate the speaker's changed attitude towards the sensory image. The speaker no longer gleefully explores nature and instead fears it. The dam itself has now changed, as well as the animals in it. The speaker now sees the frogs as obscene threats and emphasises their capacity for violence. They're like mud grenades. As a result, the speaker, sickened, runs away from the flax dam. The speaker can no longer tolerate the place. Indeed, the speaker fears that if I dipped my hand into the pond, as the speaker did without hesitation in the first stanza, the spawn would clutch it. Again, look at that verb, clutch. The speaker is now afraid of coming into contact with the frog spawn and being tainted or contaminated by it. Right, that's my analysis completed. I've tracked through from beginning, middle and end. Now I'm going to tie the bow on this present for the examiners. Overall, the poem tracks through the transformation of the speaker from a child into adolescence. The whole poem could be seen as a metaphor for growing up, laden with imagery which could be interpreted as sexual. We sense a child's revulsion as he discovers the facts of life and his ensuing loss of innocence. He will never feel the same about the countryside after this encounter. And I'm using my alternative interpretation and my tentative language as well, or the poem can be interpreted as Heaney demonstrating that, like nature, people change and go through a cycle of life, and we must all grow up and lose that childhood innocence we once possessed. So that's my analysis of The Death of a Naturalist. I hope it was really clear to you and it made sense. Now I'm going to move on to which poem would I compare it with. This is just a personal choice for me because I feel like they go together so well, but it would be the excerpt from the Prelude and Death of a Naturalist. Why? As you can see from the bullet points there, both poems explore transformation from childhood. Both poems explore memories, time and change. Wordsworth does this through Change in Season and The Dying Day, whereas Heaney highlights the loss of innocence due to the loss of his younger brother. So a bit more context there as well. Heaney, when he was in his first years of university, unfortunately his younger brother died in a car accident, and it really changed his perspective of life. I could have gone down another route in my analysis of death and naturalist and included that bit of context, but I just didn't feel it was necessary for the question I was answering. So, and that's a good lesson to learn as well, that not every bit of context needs to be shoved in just because you know it. If it's relevant to the path you're taking in the analysis of your question, absolutely include it. But for me today, I didn't need it. I hope you've enjoyed this quick, quite intense lecture on Death of a Naturalist Year 11. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to either post them to your teachers and show my homework, or come and find myself, Miss Gordon, in E4. Thank you. Bye-bye.